Hey, you fancy nerds. Welcome back to this show that I'm calling Into the Omniverse. Verse. The show where we take each and every universe comic books have to offer and break them down. Vote in the upper right-hand corner to decide which DC universe we will talk about first. Now, this is part 2 for the DC Multiverse Explained, so if you haven't seen part 1, then that is also available in the upper right-hand corner. Go watch it right now. So, when we left off in the last video, we were discussing Crisis on Infinite Earths. Let's just jump right back in. So, Crisis on Infinite Earths would not be the first or last Crisis event from DC Comics. In fact, Crisis events have their own Wikipedia page. A few of the more notable ones, for our purposes anyway, included Zero Hour Crisis in Time in 1994, Infinite Crisis in 2005 and 2006, and Final Crisis in 2008 and 2009. But let's just start after Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1986. The multiverse was gone, and in its place was New Earth and its post-Crisis continuity. In the years that followed, fans and writers began to pine for all of the lost bits of continuity and the different characters that were lost, and many of these characters and concepts began to be reinserted into the continuity through the use of retcons. Of course, the irony of that situation is that it made the continuity more and more complex and more difficult for a new reader to understand, which, as you'll recall, was the entire point of this Crisis experiment to begin with. A good example of this was Supergirl. She was eliminated entirely because DC editorial wanted Superman to be the sole survivor of Krypton. And that probably just sounded great to them at the time, but fans were not happy. Supergirl was reintroduced, but not as Superman's Kryptonian cousin. No, she was introduced with a more complicated backstory, and this just served to make things even more complicated. Her backstory was confusing and needlessly elaborate, and it just really worked against the goal of simplifying things for new readers. So, less than 10 years after Crisis on Infinite Earths, the concept of parallel universes was brought back in what was explained as hypertime. So, hypertime is similar to a multiverse. It's like an infinitely branching tree, each branch of which is a different time stream. And these tributary timelines diverge and reemerge into the regular timeline. If it sounds weird and complicated, that's because it is. It was basically just a way to explain poor continuity without a multiverse. It was around this time that Elseworld stories started to pop up as tributary timelines. A good example of this is Power Girl. She was explicitly removed from her membership in the Justice Society of America, but she was given an Elseworld story where she was a member of the JSA. The main timeline continued without her as a member, but more and more stories were being told in the Elseworld series where she was a member, and then eventually in JSA Our Worlds at War, she was made a member, and so this was the tributary timeline feeding back into the main timeline, and continuity is ever-changing, and boy, was it just a mess. So Jeff Johns tried to convince the company to bring back the idea of parallel Earths in Infinite Crisis. In 2005, he wrote a story about how the Superman of Earth 2 and Alexandra Luthor of Earth 3, along with some other characters, had survived the destruction of the original Crisis and had been living in this impenetrable crystalline barrier. So Luthor's henchman Superboy Prime was punching against the barrier, and every time he hit it, it would reorder New Earth's history. That's a great way to explain continuity, right? Someone just punched the multiverse. That's it. Someone punched the multiverse, guy. Relax. So Luthor gets free and he creates infinite Earths once again. And once he's defeated, they're all merged back into a single Earth, but somehow this leftover energy from his multiverse expands into 52 identical Earths. But those Earths are corrupted by Mastermind, who somehow ate the events from all 52 and altered their histories, and each one became its own unique thing. And the mainstream DC Comics universe was called called Earth Zero, this time spelled with a number instead of a word. And so Morrison followed that up with a third crisis called Final Crisis. But this was not a full reboot. It did reinvent the New Gods, and it did introduce some new concepts and characters, but by 2011, DC Comics tossed out the continuity again in favor of another total reboot. In DC's mind, if they created a sort of entry-level comic book universe, then they would sell more books and make more money. That's usually what the motivation is with any reboot. Simplify things and give new readers a place to jump on. But because of the nature of comic books, things inevitably get complicated again. So Flashpoint comes along, and many readers did not understand that Flashpoint would be a total reboot. By the end of the series, DC had relaunched with 52 brand new series. And of course, they named this post-Flashpoint universe the New 52. 52 new series, 52 new Earths, and 52 new universes making up the DC Multiverse. I love this concept. It's lots of fun. But DC never really capitalized on it. Basically, all the parallel Earths went to Grant Morrison for his Multiversity series, and everyone else concentrated on Earth Zero. And in 2014, Grant Morrison mapped out the entire multiverse in the Multiversity. It contained an all-new Earth 2, spelled with the number 2, and an all-new Earth 3, ditto, and it contained the same Earth 0 that was created in Infinite Crisis number 6. It also illustrated the Speed Force Wall, the Source Wall, Limbo, and many other DC concepts. So 2016 comes along, and we have DC Rebirth, which is a soft reboot of DC Comics. It took its name from Green Lantern Rebirth and Flash Rebirth, both written by Jeff Johns, both of which focused on returning the title character to an earlier status quo. So the purpose of DC Rebirth was to sort of synchronize the post-Flash continuity and the post-Crisis continuity, sort of cherry-picking the best bits from each, and also, again, creating a new jumping-on point for new comic book readers. And that's where we currently stand. This 2014 map of the DC Multiverse is still valid, although Rebirth has changed some of the continuity inside those universes, and so there are 52 Earths in the local multiverse right now, but due to several instances of time-traveling shenanigans that I will not get into right now, there is an infinite number of universes from previous incarnations of the multiverse that exist beyond those 52. Keeping it simple, incarnations of the multiverse are sort of suspended within a multi-multiverse, with additional multiverses existing as bubbles of grouped universes, of which this local 52 is just one. And that is the DC Multiverse Explained. So jump on down to the comments section and let us know, what's your favorite DC Comics universe? Also, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you can vote in a poll that will determine what DC universe we'll cover first, so don't forget to vote. And please don't forget to ring the bell so that you get notified when we release a new video, and share this video on Twitter, Facebook, or Reddit, especially Twitter. Use the share buttons below the video to let YouTube know that you liked this video enough to share it with your friends. And until next time, guys, be kind to each other. I'm Jay Parks.